So we're in. So if John is not here, and Jeremiah is going to be mostly absent, but he's got us started. We're recording and we're live streaming. And so I think that everybody who's on this Zoom has been introduced to Violetta so far 5 times. So I can I can skip to the point, which is that she is continuing with this magnificent multiple session presentation on the life of Bahá'u'lláh. And just to give you a clue, we're going up through the 25th. Then we're taking 2 or 3 days off. That's yet to be decided how long. 2 or 3 days off while Violetta travels. And then we're going to resume until the close of this month. Okay? So we'll be going through the 31st. And that should give her enough time. And if it doesn't, I'll extend the class further. Okay. I've got a phone call, so I'm going to go answer that. And you're on.
All right. I'm going to take over now. So friends, yesterday we looked at a really wonderful chapter of Baha'u'llah's life, how he spent 7 years in Baghdad and revealed extraordinary works like the 7 Valleys, the Hidden Words, the Kitab-i-Ikan, and how he spiritually reformed the Babi community of Baghdad in preparation for his declaration on the 22nd of April, 1863. We also saw that he suffered a lot of opposition, 9 months of opposition, and because his enemies plotted together, he was in exile the second time. And we are now in between his stay in Baghdad and his journey towards his second exile. This is the in-between phase where Baha'u'lláh has proclaimed his declaration to the believers of Baghdad that accompanied him on the island, on the Garden of Rizwan, formerly the Garden of Najib Pasha, Najibiye Garden. And we ended yesterday with the understanding that we actually know very little about the actual declaration. We know that certain people were present, and the most we know about the declaration is in a tablet of Rizwan that we know very well, that is a long tablet of Rizwan, revealed 5 years after the declaration in Edirne, where Baha'u'lláh shares the spiritual powers that were present during the declaration. And today we are picking up on the 9th and the 12th day of Rizwan. Why is the 9th day a holy day for Baha'is? Because that is the day when his family joined him in the Garden of Rizwan. And the 12th day is a holy day because that is the day Baha'u'lláh left the Garden of Rizwan and left Baghdad forever. So we're going to start with the 9th day of Rizwan on the 30th of April, 1863, with a view of the entrance to the Baghdad Garden of Rizwan, the Najibiye Garden, in the 1920s. Before Asiye Khanum and the rest of Baha'u'llah's family joined him in the Garden of Rizwan on the 9th day of Rizwan, they were still in the most great house preparing food, along with the household of Mirza Musai Javahiri, to send to Baha'u'lláh and his companions in the garden. And they were making preparations for the long overland journey ahead. The Tigris River had overflowed on the first day of Rizwan, and the lock gates had to be opened to ease the flooding. The Tigris flooded for 9 days and subsided on the 9th day, the 30th of April, 1863, when the Holy Family was finally able to cross the river to the garden and join Baha'u'lláh. Immediately after their crossing, the Tigris River began to swell again, and the floodgates had to be reopened. The 3 days later, on the 3rd of May, 1863, the 12th day of Rizwan, Baha'u'lláh leaves Baghdad. This is an Arabic language map of Baghdad then and now, which describes the transformation of place through time. And this is an homage to Baha'u'llah's spiritual transformation of the Babi community of Baghdad. This image is copyrighted by Barry Lawrence Rutherman Maps, and it was used with their permission. Throughout the 12th day of Rizwan, the 3rd of May, 1863, people poured into the garden to say their farewells. The saddened believers remained in Baghdad, and Baha'u'lláh spoke words of comfort and consolation and explained to them that some of the believers would accompany him and that they would have that some of the believers that were accompanying Baha'u'lláh on the journey to Istanbul would have been a test to the believers in Baghdad. And so he took them with him, saying, "It is better for the cause. Some of these people who accompany me are liable to do mischief. Therefore, I am taking them with myself." We are seeing the beginning here of Baha'u'lláh surrounding himself with people who are going to do mischief to the faith. And this is something that will continue in Edirne and in Akka, and in Mazrai and in Bahji. After Baha'u'llah's words, a believer recited the following poem by Sa'di, addressing the crowd in a voice filled with emotion and profound sorrow. "Let us all rise to weep, like unto the clouds of the spring season. On the day when lovers are separated from their beloved, one can even hear the lamentation of stones." And Baha'u'lláh reportedly responded, "Verily, this was said for this day." When the mules had been loaded, the women and children took place inside. And towards sunset, Baha'u'lláh mounted his horse Saudi, a red roan stallion of the finest breed, the best his followers could purchase for him. One of the friends placed a sack of coins in front of the saddle. Baha'u'lláh began to distribute the coins to the wailing poor who were standing by, letting them distribute the coins among themselves, when they began to run to him, pushing each other. Baha'u'llah's departure from the Najibiyye garden caused such a tumult that some of the eyewitnesses compared it to the Day of Judgment. Babis and Muslims alike cried, and the notables who were present were wonderstruck by the wave of deep emotion that affected every observer. As Baha'u'lláh rode away from Baghdad, he left behind him a multitude of bowed heads on either side, countless people rushing in to kiss the hoof of his horse or embrace his stirrups. Baha'u'lláh left Baghdad like a king, later testifying to this fact in an actual tablet. "He, God, it was, who enabled me to depart out of the city, Baghdad, clothed with such majesty as none except the denier and the malicious can fail to acknowledge." Mirza Asadullah Kashani was a devoted disciple of Baha'u'lláh and his self-appointed guard. He was a very short man and always carried a concealed dagger when he walked behind Baha'u'lláh in public. The day Baha'u'lláh left Baghdad, although he had asked the believers not to follow him, Mirza Asadullah could not let him out of his sight and ran behind the caravan for 3 hours. Baha'u'lláh dismounted, waited for him, and in his beautiful voice, filled with love and kindness, told him to go back to Baghdad and start working for the faith with energy, adding, "Be not overcome with sorrow. I am leaving friends I love in Baghdad." And now we start part 5, which takes place during the year 1863. It's the story of the journey to Constantinople and Baha'u'llah's 4 months in Constantinople. This part covers the life of Baha'u'lláh from May to December 1863, when Baha'u'lláh is 46 years old. The first part is 3rd of May to the 16th of August, 1863, the March of the King of Glory, part 1, the caravan. So this is a Persian howdah. You can clearly see the cloth covering and the wooden base, as well as the 2 compartments, which seat 1 person each. There were 7 such howdahs in Baha'u'llah's caravan. It was a large caravan. The caravan accompanying Baha'u'lláh comprised of 50 mules, 10 guards and their officers on horses, nearly 60 animals in total. There were 7 howdahs carried on mules topped by parasols in which the women and children traveled. Baha'u'lláh, Abdul Baha, the officers, and some of the men traveled on horseback. Some of them traveled on mules. Some mules carried packs, but most men walked beside the caravan. The caravan most often stopped along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and their tributaries, where camps were set up and travelers could bathe in the clean water. And at times, the caravan stopped in caravanserais. This is a map to show you the scale of the journey. It was 2,100 kilometers, 1,600 by overland, and 900 by sea, and 1,300 miles, most of it overland. These are only a small fraction of the stops made by Baha'u'llah's caravan. 2/3 of Baha'u'llah's journey to Constantinople or Istanbul were overland to the port of Samsun on the Black Sea, approximately 1,600 kilometers or 990, almost 1,000 miles. On the last third from Samsun to Istanbul, about 800 kilometers, 490 miles of the journey were by sea. The caravan stopped, set up camp, rested, and packed up to continue their march 10 times between the cities of Mosul and Kirkuk, a distance of only 173 kilometers or 107 miles. In this segment, the caravan only averaged about 17 kilometers or 10 miles a day. But usually the caravan covered about 40 to 50 kilometers a day, 25 to 30 miles a day before setting up camp. So on average, Baha'u'lláh, the Holy Family, and the exiles must have stopped between 60 and 65 times before Samsun, repeating the exhausting process of stopping, setting up camp, resting, bathing, packing up, continuing for a full day, then stopping, setting up camp, resting, and packing up for 3 months over rough terrain in the full heat of the Arabian Anatolian summer. Baha'u'llah's companions. In the absence of a seal of Baha'u'lláh that reads Mirza Hussein Ali, like in the story that I'm going to tell you below, this is an illuminated seal of Baha'u'lláh reading Baha'u'lláh. Some of Baha'u'llah's other seals are beautiful phrases in Arabic. This seal was the most straightforward, though, to illustrate this touching story. Before leaving Baghdad, Baha'u'lláh requested that a list be made for the Ottoman authorities of all of the people in the caravan, which he sealed himself with his seal reading Mirza Hussein Ali, the seal which he used for official documents. Altogether, 54 people, including the member of Baha'u'llah's immediate family, accompanied him to Istanbul. Along the way, one child passed away, and 2 people, Mirza Yahya and the historian Nabil, would join the caravan as it traveled. And beyond the names, there is just a list here that we have in the archives of the Baha'i World Center. And it says Mirza Hussein Ali, 1 eldest son, 1 brothers, 2 female members of the household, 12 children of all ages, 12 less the one who died en route, servants 20, others with their own mules who would return 7, and horses 6. This is just Baha'u'llah's entourage. So the March of the King of Glory. This is a march of a caravan with a howdah on rough terrain. But of course, the subjects in this painting appear to be warriors. But this is just an idea of what a caravan would have looked like climbing on mountains. Baha'u'lláh traveled in a dignified and regal manner in his howdah, which he shared with his wife, Asiye Khanum. Haji Mahmud led the mule carrying Baha'u'llah's howdah, and 2 believers walked on either side. On approach of a village or town, Abdul Baha would bring Baha'u'lláh his horse and take his place in the howdah with Asiye Khanum, reversing the process as they left a town. Baha'u'lláh would then ride out to meet the officials and notables who invariably came out to greet him. Namik Pasha's order to welcome Baha'u'lláh was followed by local government officials all along Baha'u'llah's route. In many of the cities and towns where he stopped, Baha'u'lláh would be met by a delegation before his arrival and accompanied some distance by another similar delegation upon his departure. These delegations sometimes comprised valis, governors, mutisarifs, administrators of larger divisions, kaim makams, deputies representing the Persian Shah, mudirs, local governors, sheikhs, learned Sufis allowed to teach, muftis, Islamic jurists, and qadis, judges, as well as other local government officials. In some places, villagers organized festivities in Baha'u'llah's honor. They prepared food and made sure he was comfortable, showing him great reverence. The local inhabitants who saw Baha'u'llah travel stated they had never witnessed anyone like him, majestic in his journey, generous with his bounty, and hospitable to all. Abdul-Baha had a very important role during the journey. This is a caravan of Persian pilgrims to Mecca, another illustration of semi-contemporary caravans. Abdul-Baha was by now a handsome, gracious young man of 19 years old. He was capable, he was firm, zealous, generous to all, and utterly devoted to Baha'u'llah. He made the arrangements for the difficult journey across Iraq and Anatolia, the region of Turkey where they were crossing. And he was in constant attendance to Baha'u'llah for his every need. He rode by Baha'u'llah the entire day. He was always the first one to reach the campsite and make sure everyone was comfortable and all the travelers were able to dismount and rest. Abdul-Baha was the self-appointed, quote, head of the commissariat department, is what he called it, which meant that after an arduous day of riding, as soon as everyone had settled down for the night, Abdul-Baha's work began again. He went door to door in Arab or Kurd villages or camps, convincing them to sell him enough food for 60 animals and 72 people. Abdul-Baha later said, I always first thought about the feed for the animals. Without the animals, they couldn't travel. Without healthy animals, they couldn't go far. When the provisions were scarce or when they traveled through famine-stricken areas, Abdul-Baha often spent the entire night in search for food. Returning to camp with provisions, Abdul-Baha was at times so exhausted he could no longer stand on his feet. But still, he supervised the fair distribution of fodder among the animals and would often go to sleep without having eaten anything. Abdul-Baha rode a very fine, very spirited Arabian horse who helped him catch short naps through the journey. Abdul-Baha would ride ahead swiftly of the caravan, and the horse would just lie down on the ground and let Abdul-Baha take short naps using his neck as a pillow. When the caravan approached, the horse would move a little bit and wake up Abdul-Baha, who would mount again the horse and then race ahead of the caravan to catch another short nap. I promised you would see these people again. Here are 6 of the believers who accompanied Baha'u'llah on his journey, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about their duties. So the first one here is Mirza Agha Jan. This is Agha Reza. The third one is Mirza Mahmud, who held the reins of Abdul-Baha's mule when he was in the Hauda with Asiya Khanum. This is Agha Abdul Ghaffar, Ustad Muhammad Ali Salmani, his barber, and Agha Husseini Haschi, maker of broth. So you'll see them mentioned. You can see the numbers behind the photographs. I'll tell you who I'm speaking with by referring to those numbers. The journey to Constantinople was a logistically complex endeavor with many people and many animals who all had to be fed and cared for, traveling thousands of kilometers in harsh terrain. For this journey to be a success, everybody needed to have a job. Mirza Agha Jan, picture 1, and Mirza Agha Munir were Baha'u'llah's personal attendants. When they traveled at night, Mirza Agha Munir walked in front of Baha'u'llah's Hauda with a lantern. And during the day, when walking beside the Hauda, he would chant beautiful poems by Hafiz. Agha Abdul Ghaffar, picture 4, was a trader from Esfahan, and he was the only fluent Turkish speaker in the caravan. So he made contacts along the journey, and he served as an interpreter for everyone. Agha Reza, picture 2, and Mirza Mahmoudi Kashani, picture 3, were the cooks of the caravan. During the day, Agha Reza and Mirza Mahmoud guided the horses carrying Baha'u'llah's Hauda, and they cooked the meal as soon as the caravan halted. They served everyone, washed the dishes, and packed them up. Abdul-Baha said that by a certain point, they were so tired, they could have slept on a hard boulder. In the morning, they had to be shaken awake, but still they chanted prayers during the day, and they were sometimes so exhausted that they sleepwalked. Agha Muhammad Ibrahimi Amir and Agha Najaf Ali were responsible for pitching the tents and for the security of the camp. Darvish Sidka Ali, Sayyid Husseini Khashi, and Haji Ibrahim groomed the horses, and Sayyid Hussein was in charge of Namik Pasha's horse. Uthman was the muleteer. Agha Muhammad Ali Ijilawdar was in charge of the fodder and the barley for the animals. Mirza Jafar Yazdi often accompanied Abdul-Baha to the surrounding villages and purchased straw and provisions for the mules and the horses. Agha Muhammad Ibrahimi Nazir and Mirza Jafar were responsible for the purchasing of anything that was needed along the journey. Ustad Muhammad Ali Isalmani, picture 5, was Baha'u'llah's barber, but he also kept watch over the tents and all the belongings of the caravan, and he was in charge of supplies. Whatever article someone needed, he always ensured that the items were returned, but perhaps his most difficult responsibility, I'm not joking, was being in charge of the howdah belonging to Mirza Yahya's wife, a very difficult and quarrelsome woman. Agha Muhammad Bakir Mahallati was in charge of providing coffee and the water pipes. 2 brothers from Kashan, Ustad Bakir and Ustad Muhammad Ismail, were the tailors who had sewn the clothes for the journey, and they were in charge of the tea and the samovar. Of course, this caravan is composed mainly of Persians. Tea is essential to life. I'm drinking tea right now. Agha Hussein Ashchi, picture 6, was a very young boy. He was the apprentice cook, and he made the broth and also served the ladies of the caravan, and he was also the porridge cook in the morning. His last name, Ashchi, literally means maker of broths. Another young boy, Agha Muhammad Hassan, also served the ladies. Now you remember during the festival of Rizwan, during Baha'u'llah's declaration, the governor Namik Pasha came to the island, and he told Baha'u'llah that his enemies were wishing he had stayed and how sad he was that he left. And oh, by the way, can you please take a horse for me to Istanbul? This is not the horse. This is a photograph I found in the Library of Congress. This is a Black Arabian horse named Behim in Istanbul. And I just thought it would be a great illustration for this story about a horse that goes to Istanbul. So Baha'u'llah had agreed to take the horse to Istanbul, and the horse traveled with the exiles. He was cared for by a believer named Sayyid Hussein Ikashi, who was a very kind and very simple man who was filled with jokes, had a great sense of humor. He was so funny that he used to dance and caper about in front of Baha'u'llah's horse. And one day along the route, Sayyid Hussein Ikashi went to Baha'u'llah to complain about Abdul-Baha. He said Abdul-Baha had given barley and fodder to the other animals, but he hadn't given him anything for Namik Pasha's horse. When Abdul-Baha entered the tent, he ran off. So there was a very sweet and delightful moment during this caravan. And this was when Baha'u'llah cooked for his family a recipe from Suleymaniye. This is a photograph from 1851, 1852 of an encamped tent near Egypt. And just an image to the type of tent maybe that Baha'u'llah and his family were in when he cooked this sweet dish for his beloved ones. One day, after a long and cold march, Abdul-Baha found bread, rice, and milk. And Baha'u'llah used the ingredients to prepare a sort of rice pudding for his family by boiling the ingredients together with some sugar. This was a dish Baha'u'llah had sometimes made for himself during his seclusion on Sargalu, the only time he ever ate warm food. So this section is the March of the King of Glory, part 2, between Iraq. It's basically Iraq. All of the stops in Iraq between Baghdad and Mosul, because after Mosul, the caravan leaves Iraq to go into Turkey proper. So it's estimated they left the border of Iraq around June 1863. So this is about the first month of their actual stops. And the rest of the part here is just going to be their progressive progress towards Samsun, that port on the Black Sea. And so we're going to go through all the stops I was able to find stories for. This one is from the 3rd to the 9th of May, 1863, Firayjat, the first stop in the journey. And Firayjat is no longer a place, but and there is no indication online of its contemporary name, if it has one. But this is a 1932 photograph from the American colony in Jerusalem of the banks of the Tigris River, which is where Firayjat used to be. So it's just like many pictures in this chronology, it's just a symbolic illustration. Bahá'u'lláh, his family, and their fellow exile reached Firayjat 5 kilometers, 3 miles away from Baghdad as the sun was setting on the 3rd of May, 1863, the day they left the garden. It's the same day, a few hours later. Firayjat was on the banks of the Tigris River and boasted the large mansion of the ex-governor of Baghdad, Dawood Pasha, and a verdant garden. Bahá'u'lláh stayed in the mansion in Firayjat for 7 days while Mirza Musa was finishing up, tidying their affairs in Baghdad and packing and loading the remainder of their possessions. While they were in Firayjat, the horses of the caravan were made to run a course to test their fitness for the journey, and everyone witnessed Bahá'u'llah's excellent horsemanship. Bahá'u'lláh had 3 horses for the journey. The first one, which he had ridden out of Baghdad when he left the garden of Rizwan, was a red roan stallion named Saudi, and his other 2 horses were Farangi and Said. Abdul Baha had a wild and spirited Arab horse to ride, and there were also 2 donkeys for him and Mirza Mehdi to ride occasionally. While they stayed in Firayjat, people continued to stream in daily from Baghdad, finding the separation from Bahá'u'lláh to be unbearable. On the 9th of May, 1863, Bahá'u'lláh revealed the Lawh-e-Firayjat, the tablet of Firayjat. This image is an almost contemporary photograph of various Arabs that Bahá'u'lláh loved so much. One of them, they are 3 Iraqi Arabs wearing traditional clothing of the Baghdad region from left to right, a Shamar Arab on the left, an Arab Muslim woman of Baghdad in the middle, and a Zubayd Arab on the right. On the 9th of May, 1863, the day Bahá'u'lláh left Firayjat, he marked the occasion by revealing a particularly significant tablet in Arabic, which is not well known outside of Iraq. This tablet is called the Lawh-e-Firayjat, the tablet of Firayjat. That day was the day Bahá'u'lláh left Iraq for real and forever. And he also left its people forever. These Arabs that Bahá'u'lláh had so loved and taught for nearly 10 years from the beginning of his arrival in 1854. And they were the first Baha'is in history, the first people to ever see the dawning of his light in Sulaymaniyeh. They were the ones who had been streaming through his house before he left. They were the ones who had streamed through the garden of Rizwan to say goodbye to him. They had followed him every stop of the way from Baghdad to Firayjat. They had streamed through the doors of Firayjat to say goodbye again, and they could not bear to be separated from him. And in this tablet, Bahá'u'lláh speaks of his departure and, quote, "At this time when the accents of the dove of separation are raised up from the land of Iraq." Bahá'u'lláh begs God to send down upon him every affliction intended for his loved ones, so that nothing could dampen their devotion, and implore God to, quote, "preserve thy loved ones after I am gone." He also asks God to gather and sever them from all attachments so they may stand in fear of no one, to open their eyes, allowing them to ascend unto the station of a true believer, speaking praises of God continually, and return to God so completely that, quote, "naught could cause them any perturbation." If you would like to listen to a captivating chant of this tablet by the singer Kawakib Hussein, you can go to the chronology and click on the link. From the 9th to the 12th of May, 1863, Judaidah, And as an illustration, just an aerial photograph of the river Tigris outside of Baghdad, showing palm groves on its banks. Leaving Firayjat on the 9th of May, 1863, the caravan followed the banks of the Tigris, reaching Judaidah in the late afternoon of the same day. There was no garden there, but they raised tents and stayed for 3 days. While they were in Judaidah, more believers joined the exiles. Shati Reza brought with him Agha Muhammad Hassan, a young boy whose father would soon be martyred. Agha Muhammad Hassan would be raised in Baha'u'llah's home and would serve him faithfully until his death in extreme old age. After the 12th of May, 1863, Judaidah, Dili Abbas, Karitapi, and Salahiyeh. This is a very verdant portion of the Sirwan River, which flows from Iran and throws itself into the Tigris. Some of the parts of the caravan's journey would have looked like this. After leaving Judaidah on the 12th of May, 1863, the caravan made its way to Dili Abbas in a verdant plain by the Tigris River, where they pitched their tents, and they left at midnight. You're going to see this quite often. The caravan will travel by night because it's cooler at night, and then they will sleep during the hot hours of the day because it was still the brutal summer sun. So they arrived in Karitapi later that day and then continued on to Salahiyeh, a small town beside a mountain situated on a tributary of the river Diyala. The Qaim Maqam and other notables of Salahiyeh came out to greet the caravan and offer their respects. And then they held a festival in honor of Bahá'u'lláh. The caravan stayed in Salahiyeh for 2 nights, and the officials of the town provided nightly watches against highwaymen. Highwaymen were a particular concern. They are going to show up regularly in this journey of the caravan, and they were very dangerous. Between Salahiyeh and Dust Khurmatu. This is a rare image of a caravan in Mesopotamia, Iraq, that has mules and horses, exactly like Baha'u'llah's caravan. The caravan left Salahiyeh on the 3rd night, pressing on in the darkness despite hurricane-level winds. This was a night when poor Agha Reza, the faithful cook, had a very frightening experience. Agha Reza had sat down momentarily, and he'd fallen asleep for 5 hours. And when he woke up, the caravan was gone, nowhere to be seen. By dawn, miraculously, he found the caravan again that was occupied with morning tea and dawn prayers. Mirza Musa told him that they had just noticed his absence and were about to send men out looking for him. It was very common at the time when caravans journeyed at night that travelers would get lost. And this would happen more than once to Baha'u'llah's caravan on his long march towards Istanbul. So now Dust Khurmatu, Tawuk, and Kirkuk. This is a 1932 photograph of the city of Kirkuk with a caravanserai, an inn for travelers, and pack animals in the foreground. Later that morning, the caravan reached Dust Khurmatu and camped under a small grove of trees, traveling by night again and reaching Tawuk by a hillside where a small river flowed. They continued on their way to Kirkuk, where they stayed in an orchard outside of the city for 2 days. In Kirkuk, nobles and notables came out to welcome Baha'u'lláh. The caravan had now entered Kurdish territory, a culture Baha'u'lláh knew very well from his time in Sulaymaniyeh. And when a man arrived towards him, shouting in a state of exaltation, Baha'u'lláh prevented his followers from intervening. The man would have known him, obviously, and recognized him. Kirkuk was the largest town in lower Kurdistan on the Khasa River. The waters of the Khasa were cold and the current was swift. A high bridge crossed the ravine, and a local man, to show his ability, dove from the bridge into the river. His feat pleased Baha'u'lláh, and when the diver entered his presence, Baha'u'lláh gave him a little bit of money. While Baha'u'lláh stayed in Kirkuk, some high officials came to visit him, and Baha'u'lláh met with the son of Sheikh Muhyiddin of Qanikain, the man in whose honor he had revealed the 7 valleys. The old sheikh had died before Baha'u'lláh arrived in Kirkuk, but his son, Sheikh Ali, entered Baha'u'llah's presence with great devotion. 28th of May, 1863, Erbil. This is a stunning photograph of Erbil, taken by the American colony of Jerusalem. Just a beautiful photograph. The caravan was slowly leaving Iraq as it wound its way to Erbil, one of the last stops before entering Turkey proper. Erbil and its hilltop castle sat on a plain opening west to the great Zab River. The day Baha'u'lláh arrived in Erbil was the feast of Eid al-Adha, the feast of sacrifice, one of the holiest days in the Islamic calendar, enabling us to date this precisely, honoring Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son in obedience to God. The prominent men of Erbil came to greet Baha'u'lláh on this holy day, and as their offering brought meat cooked from sacrificial animals. And now we're leaving Iraq as Baha'u'llah's caravan journeys between Erbil and Mosul. This is a very beautiful photograph of the Zab River between Erbil and Mosul. Leaving Erbil behind, the caravan hired boats to cross the rushing waters of the Zab River and lost 2 mules that were carried away by the current. The caravan set up camp on the other side of the Zab River and were about to start their night march towards Mosul when high winds began to blow. They halted for a short while in a Christian village called Baratile and set up camp on the banks of the Tigris near Nabiullah Yunus, where some believe Jonah, also known as Yunus in Arabic, is buried. On the opposite side of the river was Mosul, a handsome though slightly decayed city whose houses on the slope of the Jabal Jubila formed a 6-mile amphitheater. In Mosul, Mirza Yahya returns. This is a bizarre scene in Mosul by the Tigris River. It's the shoe market. I was very excited to find a shoe market as a picture because Mirza Yahya was living under a fake name selling shoes at the time in a bazaar. So Baha'u'lláh stayed in Mosul for 3 days and visited the public baths, and notables came to pay their respects to him in his camp on the bank of the Tigris. Mirza Yahya, afraid Baha'u'lláh would be handed over to Persian authorities so close to Iran, had traveled from Mosul in disguise now that he was further away from Iran and improperly inside Iraq. But still, he was disguised as a dervish with a black cord around his head and an alms bowl in his hand. He joined the caravan from Mosul all the way to Istanbul. And he immediately started causing trouble. No surprise. He began fighting with his future acolyte, Sayyid Muhammadi Isfahani, who was also in the caravan, and they were both reprimanded by Baha'u'lláh. And now we leave Iraq and we enter Turkey. This is the March of the King of Glory, Part 3, Turkey, Mosul to Kharput. This is between probably June and mid-July 1863. So between Mosul, the next stop would be Zaku. And this city of Duhok, which is the photograph here, is exactly in the midpoint between Mosul and Zaku. This mountain, Girimalta, is located on the caravan road. Baha'u'lláh had now stepped foot in Turkey for the very first time. On the way to Zaku from Mosul, they stopped by the foot of a small mountain, and the caravan encountered for the first time hostile and abusive Kurds who threw rocks at them, refused to sell them food, and denied them night guards. The exiles themselves stood watch over the caravan through the night, intoning a call and response prayer, one group chanting, "Whose is the dominion?" and the other responding, "God's, the all-powerful, the almighty." Progressing very slowly, they left at dawn because guiding the 7 howdahs through the stony forested mountain passes and the narrow gorges was very, very dangerous and very difficult. As they approached Zaku, the Qaim Makam sent a large group of men to help maneuver the caravan. Each howdah had to be guided by 4 men, and when they neared the town, they found the Qaim Makam and the notables of the town waiting for Baha'u'lláh by the roadside. They gave the travelers a warm and happy welcome and offered Baha'u'lláh a feast, which he graciously accepted. Baha'u'lláh honored his host as he made a reference to the nearby Mount Ararat, the resting place of Noah's Ark. Baha'u'lláh reportedly said, whenever on our way they wanted to treat us as their guests and provide us with a feast, we did not accept, just as Noah's Ark rested nowhere but on the peak of Ararat. The Mufti of Zaku stressed the inhabitants' delight at Baha'u'llah's presence, inviting him to stay a few days, and the Qaim Makan sent various gifts to Baha'u'llah, including snow, which would have been rare at this time of year, and punished the unruly Kurds of the previous evening. The stay in Zaku was pleasant but short, and the caravan proceeded towards Jaziri at nightfall, accompanied by an escort offered by the kind Qaim Makan. This is a photograph of Jaziri. It's ruins of the Roman Pinaka or Finique castle, where Baha'u'llah stopped. So they just reached this area the next day. They camped on the bank of the river near this castle, and they stayed until nightfall, and then they moved on to Nisibin or Nusaybin. This is the tumultuous Jack River, most commonly known as Chag. This is a river that Baha'u'llah will cross. After sunset, the caravan left Jiziri and continued its route to an old Roman city called Nisibin. They pitched their tents in a delightful spot by the torrential Jack River, which was a tributary of the Euphrates. And from Nisibin, the caravan pushed towards Mardin, 2 or 3 stages away. Now, stages are stopping points for caravans. It is usually defined as the distance a caravan can travel in one day. That is called stage. It's caravan vocabulary. One of the stops, Hassan Aga, on the way to Mardin, was located in barren plain devoid of grazing pastures. And Uthman, the muleteer, complained that his mules were not eating enough. But the region was struck with a famine, and the people of the caravan were also not getting enough food. So we have 3 stories of lost mules. This is the first one. It takes place in Mardin. Lost Mules, Part 1, the 3 lost mules. And to illustrate this, I found a Spanish photograph of 3 mules carrying packs. During Baha'u'llah's march from Baghdad to Samsun, there are 3 stories of lost mules. This author has a particular soft spot for mules. So all of the stories were included, although they were slightly abbreviated, because no one can ever get enough of mules. This charming story is part 1. From Hassan Aga, the caravan arrived in a village at the foot of Mount Mardin, a limestone cliff surmounted by an impregnable fortress, where an Arab muleteer from Damascus joined the caravans with his 3 mules. The man declined Baha'u'llah's kind invitation to sleep near the caravan, as there were always robbers on these roads. And during the night, the man's 3 mules were stolen. In the morning, as the caravan was leaving, the muleteer, beside himself with grief, rushed to Baha'u'llah's howdah and, holding the hem of his robe, begged him to help him recover his animals, fully convinced that no one in the world but Baha'u'llah had the power to help him. Touched by the man's sincerity, Baha'u'llah canceled the departure of the caravan, gave orders for the mules to be recovered, and announced that he would move into the Firdaus, a magnificent mansion, Firdaus meaning paradise, which was surrounded by an orchard with running brooks, until the animals were found. The headman of the village had no hope to find the mules again, because this caravan route was swarming with thieves, and in his lifetime, no stolen property had ever been recovered. Over the next 2 days, a constant stream of high-ranking notables from Mardin, of which half the population was Christian, came to pay their respects to Baha'u'llah. The village headman offered to pay the value of the mules several times. Baha'u'llah refused. The Muhtasarif threatened to arrest the headman. Baha'u'llah said he would cable Constantinople for a solution if they did not find the animals. And finally, on the 2nd day, the headman of the village returned the 3 mules to their distraught owner. I guess he had the mules the whole time, probably. And when Baha'u'lláh threatened to cable Istanbul, he was like, okay, this is getting a little bit serious. The people of Mardin were amazed because, as you know now, no stolen property on the caravan route had ever been recovered. As a reward for their efforts, Baha'u'lláh offered the Mufti Sarif a costly cashmere shawl and gave the Mufti an illuminated copy of the Quran, and the head of the horseman received a sword with a jewel-encrusted scabbard. On the third day, the caravan left, and perplexed men and women were heard saying in disbelief as to what had just happened, "We do not know this personage, nor are we able to fathom the force which enabled him to recover and return those mules to his owner. It was an act beyond the powers of leaders and ministers alike." Leaving Mardin, Baha'u'lláh crosses the city like a king. This is a panorama of the city of Mardin in modern day. After the mules were found, Baha'u'llah's caravan departed Firdaus and crossed the town of Mardin, preceded by a mounted escort of government soldiers carrying their banners and beating their drums in welcome, and accompanied by the Mufti Sarif. Men, women, and children of Mardin crowded the flat roofs of the city, and they crowded the streets to watch the procession as Baha'u'lláh crossed Mardin with the dignity and pomp of a king, escorted for a considerable distance out of the town by the Mufti Sarif, officials, and nobles of this city. Lost Mules Part 2, the mule with the tablets. As the caravan made its way towards Diyarbakir through a heavily wooded area, they realized a mule had gotten lost. And the officer accompanying the caravan offered his own mule in replacement, saying it would be impossible to recover the mule. This mule, however, was carrying several cases of Baha'u'llah's holy writings and other important objects, and Abdul-Bahar requested Baha'u'llah's permission to set off in the dead of night and with a few horsemen to search for the lost animal. Abdul-Bahar split the search party into several groups to search paths in the forest and told the men to call out or light a fire when they found the mules. Abdul-Bahar's fine strategy worked like a charm, and by sunrise, the mules had been found. The elated search party rejoined the caravan around noon, and Baha'u'lláh commented that the act which the Most Great Branch undertook was similar in many respects to his own determined and confident attitude in finding the Arab muleteers' 3 lost mules near Mardin. Now we arrive in Diyarbakir. This is from yesterday. You'll remember that Baha'u'lláh was so exultant when the faith of the Bab had reached Diyarbakir some years back. It's very far from Iran. It's the farthest from Iran that the faith had ever been. And this is a 1900 photograph of Diyarbakir. Diyarbakir was the largest Kurdish city in Turkey, where Turkish, Armenian, Kurd, and Arab territories converged, and at the confluence of both the Tigris and Euphrates River. At an altitude of 600 meters or 2,000 feet, Diyarbakir overlooked a very vast and very verdant and fertile plain. But the city itself, within its black basalt walls, was a humid and unhealthy city with narrow and muddy streets. The governor of Diyarbakir, Haji Kiyamili Pasha, was unfriendly towards Baha'u'lláh. And unlike his colleagues along the way, he forced the caravan to maneuver around the entire city for them to camp in Ali Parib, a lovely mansion surrounded by a large orchard. Baha'u'llah's caravan was refused entry to Ali Parib on the very, very, very strange grounds. Baha'u'lláh could not enter Ali Parib because the silk cocoons on the mulberry trees would be disturbed by the smell of their cooking. Okay. Baha'u'lláh instructed his entourage to set up camp outside the orchard, which took the rest of the day. Baha'u'lláh stayed there just outside Diyarbakir for 3 days, during which Mirza Yahya, emboldened to be so far from the Persian border, began to take life in the life of the caravan, poor caravan, accompanying others into town to make purchases. The rude governor, Haji Kiamili Pasha, would soon get his due. He would later be blamed for a bread shortage, and the people of Diyarbakir would riot, humiliating him so deeply that the government dismissed him from his post. Madan-i-Mis. So we're going to learn here about a Persian prisoner, and this is part one of the story. Part two is not immediately after. Part two of the Persian prisoner in Madan-i-Mis is going to be in Istanbul. So you're going to have to wait a little bit to hear the end of this story because, you know, me and my obsession with chronologies. So this is the landscape around Madan-i-Mis, quite beautiful. So after Diyarbakir, where they spent 3 days, the caravan moved to Madan-i-Mis, which means copper mine, and they camped at the foot of a steep castle-topped mountain. By sunset, 3 believers had joined the caravan, including Nabili Azam and Agha Hussein-i Naragi. Baha'u'lláh received a message from a Persian who was imprisoned in Madan-i-Mis while he was staying there. The Persian prisoner begged Baha'u'lláh for his intercession to help free him, and Baha'u'lláh promised to approach the Persian ambassador in Constantinople on his behalf. So the end of this story will take place in Istanbul. And now, between Madan-i-Mis and Kharput, Baha'u'lláh almost dies. This is a Google Earth photo of the area between Madan-i-Mis and Kharput to show you how mountainous it is. Leaving Madan-i-Mis on the way to Kharput, the caravan navigated its way through a narrow road in a mountain pass when poor Haji Mahmud lost his hold on the reins of the mule carrying Baha'u'llah's howdah. The mule slipped, lost its balance, and began to slide down the precipice. The accident happened in an instant, and Baha'u'llah's companions watched in horror, powerless to stop the inevitable being Baha'u'lláh and possibly Asiya Hanum in the howdah on the mule falling down the mountain. Suddenly and absolutely miraculously, the mule regained its balance and slowly came to a halt. As Baha'u'llah's companions registered that he was safe, the sheer joy of that realization filled their eyes with tears. And after this averted calamity, the best thing that could break broke. An extremely large container of rose water broke and filled the air with its fragrance. That's a nice story. Towards sunset, the caravan came upon another mountain pass with many poplar trees and a running rivulet where they stopped for the night. And the next day, they arrived at the Christian village, setting up their tents underneath abundant trees. So unfortunately, now we're arriving at the part of the story where there is a huge famine. This is the Hazargulu Lake in Elazig province, halfway between Madan-i-Mis and Kharput, and this is on the path of the caravan. Although this Baha'i history doesn't mention the lake, but this is the route the caravan would take. It would pass by this. They would have seen this lake most probably. As the caravan started crossing from eastern Anatolia into the Black Sea region of Turkey, probably we estimate sometime around mid-July 1873, there was a famine that was ravaging the area, and it became extremely difficult for Abdul Baha to obtain fodder for the animals. The animals started becoming weak and losing weight because of their scarce rations. So after the caravan set up camp, Abdul Baha and Mirza Jafar would ride from village to village and from one Arab or Kurdish tent to another, trying to find food, straw, barley, and often searching until midnight. One day, one day they called on a Turk who was harvesting, and they saw his large pile of straw. They thought to themselves, finally, our long search has come to an end. So Abdul Baha approached the man and offered to buy some straw for him. And after a moment, the Turk asked Abdul Baha, open your sack. So Abdul Baha opened his sack, and the Turk put a couple of handfuls of straw in his sack. Amused, Abdul Baha told him, oh, my friend, what can I do with this straw? We have 36 animals and we want feed for all of them. Everywhere they went, Abdul Baha encountered difficulties finding food until finally, at last, they reached Kharput and well-earned respite. This is a beautiful view of the vast plain between Kharput and Elazig, 5 kilometers, 3 miles to the southwest. Baha'u'llah's caravan reached the fortified city of Kharput, overlooking a cultivated and fruitful plain. When the caravan was still 5 kilometers away, they found officials and notables awaiting their arrival to welcome them. When the caravan of Baha'u'llah arrived in Kharput, they had covered 1,000 kilometers, 620 miles, and the animals were weak and exhausted. The acting Governor General Izzat Pasha, who loved Baha'u'llah and wanted to render him service, called on him and offered 10 carloads of rice, 10 sacks of barley, 10 sheep, several baskets of rice, several bags of sugar, and many pounds of butter as a gift. After the ordeal of the harsh journey in the midst of a punishing famine, Izzat Pasha's gifts were gladly accepted as a bounty from God. Utterly spent, Abdul-Baha slept for 2 full days and nights when they first arrived in Kharput. Just imagine this Abdul-Baha, whose chronology I wrote first, slept a maximum of 4 to 5 hours a day. He must have been so to the brink of burnout to sleep 2 full days and nights. Mirza Muhammad Ali, a younger son of Baha'u'llah from his second wife, who would be the main covenant breaker during the time of Abdul-Baha, became ill in Kharput, and the caravan stayed for a week until he recovered. During that week, Baha'u'llah and some of his entourage were able to visit the public bath, which must have been such a wonderful experience for them. Mirza Yahya ordered Ustad Muhammad Ali Salmani, Baha'u'llah's barber, to shave his young son completely bald, which was a custom at the time. But the barber went to Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah would not allow him to shave his son bald. Mirza Mehdi, the purest branch, who was around 14 years old that time, observed to Ustad Muhammad that Mirza Yahya had begun to notice that everyone was not subservient to him. At one point during their stay in Kharput, Baha'u'llah ordered some gaz, a form of Middle Eastern nougat, sort of like a very sugary dessert with nuts in it. And he shared it with everyone, and he sent 3 very nice pieces to Mirza Yahya. However, always with Mirza Yahya, there's some kind of issue, some kind of problem. So when the nougat arrived from Mirza Yahya, the 3 pieces of nougat had melted together. And, the 2 believers who were bringing them to him just figured, he's not going to want melted nuggets. We're just going to eat it. So they ate it. And Mirza Yahya was so mad. He called them traitors. He called them thieves. He accused them of not believing in the Bab, just for nougat, for gaz. I mean, come on. Mirza Yahya muttered and grumbled about his lost nuggets for several stops after they left Kharput. I mean, the guy is something else, really. Anyway. So between mid-July to the 16th of August, 1863, the March of the King of Glory, Part 4, Kharput to Constantinople. This is now Madan-i Nukri, which is now called as Kebdan, the mulberry thieves. And this is a very beautiful mulberry photograph that I found in the Library of Congress. Beautiful, beautiful tree. Leaving Kharput, Baha'u'llah was now halfway exactly between Baghdad and Istanbul. The rest of the way would be done by sea. The caravan arrived in Madan-i Nukri, which means silver mine, and they crossed the Euphrates River and set up their tent on the opposite bank. Some of Baha'u'llah's companions found mulberry trees, and they set on eating the mulberries and devouring them from the tree like locusts, basically. This aroused Baha'u'llah's anger, and he spoke very sternly to his brother, Mirza Muhammad Kuli, before returning to his tent. Mirza Muhammad Quli, when Baha'u'lláh emerged from his tent in late afternoon, as was his custom, all of his companions, including Mirza Yahya, was waiting outside with bowed heads. I mean, they had essentially stolen the mulberries from some poor farmer. So Baha'u'lláh was very unhappy with them. But speaking to them and smiling, Baha'u'lláh said, "Today, divine anger nearly seized you all, as you witnessed." There was absolute silence, and then Baha'u'lláh had tea served. I love how tea can punctuate anything. Manifestation of God almost got mad at you. Have some tea. The road to Sivas, Deliktash, which is now called as Deliktash, and 3 other stages. This is the panorama of the region of Deliktash from a height, actually. It's really beautiful. You can see the valley. Madani Nukri was 4 days away from Sivas, the next large town on the caravan's route. They were now in the uplands of Anatolia, and it was very cold. At each of the stops on the way to Sivas, including one called Deliktash, nobles came out to meet Baha'u'lláh and his entourage and make the travelers feel welcome. During one of their stops, the caravan halted by a river where Baha'u'lláh underwent bloodletting, and his blood spilled on Turkish soil, perhaps foreshadowing a coming period of turmoil and tribulation. Sivas, the poetry-loving sheikh. This is a bustling picture of from 1917 of a bustling marketplace in Sivas. The caravan reached Sivas about 1,200 meters, 4,000 feet above sea level. Now just think, they're right now 4,000 feet, 1,200 meters above sea level. They have to descend to get to the Black Sea, Samsun on the Black Sea. So they went up and down, up and down, up and down, and now they're up again, and now they have to go all the way down before they can sail to Istanbul. Everyone's possessions had to cross the Kizilmark River. Ustad Muhammad Ali Isalmani, noticing noise and bustle on the other side of the river, asked Abdul Baha to cross ahead so that the thieves wouldn't steal their belongings. And Mirza Yahya decided to cowardly cross with him first. Around sunset, the governor arrived with some officials and notables to pay their respects to Baha'u'lláh. The caravan camped for 2 days on the northern bank of the Kizilmark in very cold weather, but Baha'u'lláh was still able to visit the public bath. In Sivas, there was a sheikh, a Sufi leader well-versed in Persian, who recited several Rumi poems from the Matnavi while he was in Baha'u'llah's presence. Seeing the sheikh's interest in poetry, Baha'u'lláh recited no less than 60 verses of the Matnavi from memory, although no one had ever seen Baha'u'lláh read the book or have the book in his possession. The sheikh was deeply happy and noticeably touched by Baha'u'llah's gesture. And now in Tukat. This is the rock castle of Tukat, also from 1917. Tukat was 3 days away from Sivas, and the journey took place in, as we said previously, very, very cold weather. At one of the stops, the exiles found that all the houses were underground because of the harsh winter months. This could very well be the town of Boyunpiyar, which had underground houses and is sort of in between Sivas and Tukat on the route of the caravan. There are large underground houses in this place where people can seek refuge, and about 20 man-made rooms. The caravan also pitched its tent in a large orchard and finally reached Tukat, a city blessed with delicious, flavorful apples and pears, and they camped on the banks of the Yeşilmark River, flowing towards Amasya, their next destination. This is a street of Amasya when you enter the city. Most probably around mid-July 1863, having traveled 1,290 kilometers and having only 250 kilometers to go before reaching Samsun. So that would be 800 miles, which they traveled with only 155 miles left. The caravan paused for 2 days outside Amasya, a city described by the Oxford as the Oxford of Anatolia because of its 18 theological colleges and 2,000 Muslim students. Amasya lay in a narrow valley of the Yishilmark, dominated by steep rocky cliffs to the west and gentle slopes to the east, with houses and with terraces of vines. The governor and his officials called on Baha'u'lláh, who was able to avail himself of the public bath during this stop, but the exiles had run out of money, and some sold their horses, which fetched an excellent price. So things were becoming difficult. Now they arrived to Ilahiyeh, which is possibly this place, but this is just my research. It would be a place like this, as this place is exactly where Ilahiyeh is supposed to be on the route of the caravan. And you see that now we've arrived at a lower elevation. After a pleasant stay in Amasya, the caravan arrived at Ilahiyeh, the seat of the Qaim Makan, who arrived to the camp before Baha'u'lláh, accompanied with his officials. Because the Qaim Makan found that only the tents had arrived and not Baha'u'lláh, he himself and his companions began pitching the tents for Baha'u'lláh so they would be ready for him. And he returned later to enter his presence and pay his respects to Baha'u'lláh. It rained a little bit during Baha'u'llah's stay in Ilahiyeh, but they still had a very wonderful time in the town because the inhabitants of Ilahiyeh were kindness personified. Now, regrettably, I know you're all devastated. This is the last story of Lost Mules. Lost Mules Part 3, The Trunk Carrying Mule. This is a digital painting of the forests between Ilahiyeh and Samsun where the mule was lost. At long last, the caravan began its last leg of the 1,600 kilometer, 990 mile overland journey towards Samsun, their final stop before boarding a steamer to Constantinople. The route took the caravan through wooded mountains and thick forests, where a mule carrying trunks got lost. Abdul-Baha and two of his companions went in search of the trunk-carrying mule, found it, and rejoined the caravan the next day in the vicinity of Samsun. That night, the caravan stopped at a large coffee house before embarking on the last stage of their march. And at long last, they arrived within view of the Black Sea. To mark the memorable occasion, Mirza Agha Jan begged Baha'u'lláh to reveal a tablet we now know as the Law-i Hawdaj, the tablet of the Hawda, revealed around the 7th of August, 1863. This is 1870 photographs showing an approach to Samsun with a view of the Black Sea. After Mirza Agha Jan made a request for his tablet, while Baha'u'lláh had first caught view of the Black Sea, Mirza Agha Jan brought him writing material, and Baha'u'llah's hand moved over the paper as he sat in his hawda, reciting aloud what flowed from his pen. The Suri-i Hawdaj, the Suri of the Hawda, is also known as Law-i Samsun, Tablet of Samsun. In this tablet, Baha'u'lláh disclosed the pavilion of eternity and the Hawda of holiness at the moment when the greatest name arrived at the shore of the mighty ocean, when his, quote, terrestrial journey had found completion. Baha'u'lláh states he reaffirms and supplements his dire predictions in the tablet of the Holy Mariner. The theme is still present in his revelation that from 3 months prior, where there are warnings of impending grievous and tormenting mischief that would serve as a divine touchstone separating truth from error. Between the 7th and the 13th of August, Baha'u'lláh is in Samsun and about to begin the last leg of his journey. This is a view of Samsun in 1870, 3 years after Baha'u'lláh sailed from here. The arduous overland part of the long march of Baha'u'lláh had lasted 110 exhausting days, during which Baha'u'lláh had traversed the flat northern regions of Iraq, the homeland of the Kurds, the uplands, mountains, and valleys of Anatolia. He had crossed rivers and streams, climbed mountains, camped in caravanserais, orchards, and mansions, crossed narrow gorges and deep mountain passes, narrowly escaped death, lost 3 mules, and been received like a king in almost every place he arrived, ending the journey by revealing the momentous Law-i Hawdaj. In the words of the hand of the cause, Mr. Hassan Balyuzi, quote, a fitting end to an exodus intended by its instigators to be fraught with humiliation, but which became the march of a king. Can't beat Mr. Balyuzi. Baha'u'lláh, the Holy Family, and the band of devoted exiles, minus Mirza Yahya and Sayyid Muhammad, at their side, arrived in the port city of Samsun on the shores of the Black Sea after a grueling 1,600-kilometer journey where they waited 1 week for an Ottoman steamer to take them to Constantinople. The chief inspector showed Baha'u'lláh the utmost respect, and Baha'u'lláh invited the official to luncheon. Ottoman inspector of roads arrived in Samsun from the capital, and he became so captivated with Baha'u'llah's charm and graciousness that he had various Turkish dishes cooked to present to him. And I'm not sure about this one, brought Baha'u'lláh on a tour of some construction work he was supervising. Okay. Now we have the end of the journey by sea, Sinope, Anyabuli, and Istanbul. These are 2 photographs of Sinope by the same photographer in Wikimedia Commons. Just beautiful. The coast is just gorgeous. At last, on the 13th of August, 1863, the steamer arrived in Samsun. The exiles' trunks, goods, and horses were loaded. Baha'u'lláh and his family were taken aboard in 1 boat and the rest of his companions in a 2nd boat. They cast off anchor and sailed along the coast of Turkey, arriving in Sinope the next day, 14th of August, where they stopped for only a few hours. On the 15th of August, they dropped anchor in Anyabuli, and they arrived in Istanbul the next day after sailing 700 kilometers, 430 miles on the Black Sea. Now, between the 16th of August and September 1863, in Constantinople, in the house of Shamsi Beg. Shamsi Beg. There is no clear indication. I did a lot of asking and inquiring, and we do not know which port Baha'u'lláh arrived at after his 3-day sea journey from Samsun. So this is just a port, the port of Sirkeci on the European side of Constantinople. Baha'u'lláh set foot in Istanbul at noon on August 16th, 1863. The King of Glory had left Baghdad, the round city of the Abbasids, and arrived in the new Rome of Constantine the Great. The official who had accompanied the travelers since Baghdad went ashore to inquire about the arrangements that had been made for their arrival, and Baha'u'lláh was received with great honor by Shamsi Beg and another Ottoman official as he disembarked the ship. Shamsi Beg had been appointed by the government to entertain Baha'u'lláh and his companions. His residence, located in the vicinity of the Kirki Sharif Mosque, was to be the home of Baha'u'lláh and the Holy Family for the first month of their exile in Constantinople, while the rest of their companions were lodged elsewhere. Shamsi Beg was a courteous and generous and attentive host. He hired 2 cooks whom the exiles willingly helped prepare the meals. His house was a spacious 2-story home, but it was still not large enough to accommodate Baha'u'llah's large family comfortably, and it quickly became obvious that they would need more spacious lodgings. 16th of August, 1863, Mirza Yahya does not disappoint. How Mirza Yahya arrives in Constantinople. This is a picture of the old port of Constantinople in the late 19th century. On the day he arrived in Constantinople, and after witnessing the honors bestowed on Baha'u'lláh upon his arrival, Mirza Yahya remarked to his acolyte, Sayyid Muhammad Isfani, "Had I not chosen to hide myself, had I revealed my identity, the honor accorded him, Baha'u'lláh, on this day would have been mine too." The seed of jealousy had taken a firm root in the heart of Mirza Yahya, and in a matter of 4 short years, it would grow to smother his heart and endanger his soul. On the 17th of August, 1863, the visit of the Persian representative. This is the mosque of Kirke Sharif, This is right next door to the house of Shamsi Beg, where Baha'u'lláh was staying. The next day after his arrival, on August 17th, 1863, a representative came to offer Baha'u'lláh the respects of the Persian ambassador who had basically cooked up his exile, Haji Mirza Hussein Khan. Around noon on the same day, Baha'u'lláh went out to visit this very mosque, Kirkei Sharif Mosque, the Mosque of the Blessed Mantle, named after a relic, the mantle of Muhammad, which he reportedly gave to Kab ibn Zuhair after hearing him read a poem. And apparently the mantle was in this mosque. So this is a revelation of Baha'u'lláh in Constantinople, but it's a very short, very short section, because we do not have the original in mixed Arabic and Persian has not been translated. It has been provisionally translated as the Snow Animals letter by Juan Cole. If you want to read this tablet, you can click on the chronology. Soon after his arrival, Baha'u'lláh revealed a tablet expressing his disappointment in the people he met in Istanbul. And he described their welcome as mere, quote, conventional, officious formalities, and found them to be, quote, many barren trees and much frozen snow. And he compared them to, quote, snow animals. Between August and December of 1863, Baha'u'lláh in Constantinople. This is a view of the very beautiful and very famous Fatih Mosque, where Baha'u'lláh went daily for noon prayers. During his 4 months in Constantinople, Baha'u'lláh only visited mosques, his brother Mirza Musa's home, and the public bath. Already, you see the difference with Baghdad. Many called on Baha'u'lláh in his homes, but Baha'u'lláh himself did not visit other people's homes. At times, in the home of Mirza Musa, Baha'u'lláh would meet officials, delivering messages from the government and accompanied by his interpreter, Abdul Ghaffar, who was the same who translated into Turkish during the journey. The notables of Constantinople told Baha'u'lláh it was customary for a distinguished visitor to call the foreign minister after 3 days, which would open the door to meeting first the Grand Vizier and then the Sultan, and they advised Baha'u'lláh to follow this protocol. Baha'u'lláh informed them he had no design or project to advance, no favor to ask or to receive, and that he had come to Istanbul by invitation of the Ottoman government. If the Ottoman government had something they needed to convey to him, they could come to him. Agha Riza's dream of Baha'u'lláh. This is going to make sense later. This is a Russian engraving of people waiting at a flour mill. At the end of the story, you'll know why I put that as a picture. One day, Agha Riza, one of the cooks of the caravan, dreamt that Baha'u'lláh had written a book which was held by someone in a public square, and that there was a flour mill which people could not get going. The mill would only move in jerks, and it would stop and move and stop and move and stop and move. That day towards sunset, Baha'u'lláh was about to leave the house to visit the mosque when Agha Riza entered his presence. Baha'u'lláh told him, smiling, that he should endeavor to get the mill going. For some time after, and even in Edirne, Baha'u'lláh would sometimes turn to Agha Riza and said, the mill did not get started. Baha'u'lláh had a great sense of humor. So remember the prisoner in Madani-Nis? This is part 2 of the Persian prisoner in Madani-Nis. And look at the distance between Madani-Nis in Anatolia and Istanbul, where Baha'u'lláh currently is. That's 1,200 kilometers, 745 miles. And Baha'u'lláh did not forget this man. After the Persian prisoner in Madani-Nis had pleaded for Baha'u'lláh to intercede on his behalf, Baha'u'lláh had nearly died when a mule carrying his howdah had lost its footing. And they had crossed famine-stricken regions. They had traveled thousands of kilometers, but Baha'u'lláh did not forget the poor man in Anatolia. And he sent word to the Persian ambassador, Haji Mirza Hussein Khan, and the Persian prisoner in Madani-Nis was released. And now this is sort of part 2 of Baha'u'lláh in Constantinople. This is the house of Visi Pasha between September and the 1st of December, 1863. So this is a photograph of the top of the mosque of Nisanchi Mehmet Pasha, which is 30 meters, 98 feet from the house of Vichy Pasha, directly across the street. After a month spent in uncomfortably tight conditions in the house of Shamsi Beg, Baha'u'lláh and the Holy Family moved to the house of Vichy Pasha near the mosque of Sultan Muhammad Fatih, also known as the Mosque of Sultan Ahmed and the Blue Mosque. The new house was a palatial residence. Like the most great house in Baghdad, it had both a Biruni, a public men's quarters, and an Andaruni, a women's inside quarters. Both Biruni and Andaruni were 3 stories high and well equipped. The house boasted a Turkish bath, a spacious garden, and rainwater collecting facilities. Baha'u'llah's quarters were on the first floor of the Andaruni, with the rest of the family occupying the other 2 stories. Abdul Baha lived on the first floor of the Biruni, Baha'u'llah's companions on the 2nd floor, and the 3rd floor was turned into a kitchen and a storehouse, where they stored things. A tent was pitched in the courtyard for 2 Christian servants sent by the government to do the shopping and perform various duties. Every morning, Baha'u'llah's former host, Shamsi Beg, came calling to the house of Vichy Pasha and took care of Baha'u'lláh and the Holy Family's needs and ensured their well-being. Now, this is very, very exciting. This is the first photograph that we have, a group photograph of the first group photograph of Baha'is in history, really. In 1863, which is happening at this point in the story. This is exactly when it happens. And you see here Mirza Musa, Baha'u'llah's faithful brother, in the very center of the photograph, dressed in white with a white turban and a black beard. And from left to right are Haji Mirza Ahmad-i Kashani, Sayyid Muhammad-i Isfahani, the covenant breaker, and standing from left to right are Agha Muhammad Sadiq-i Isfahani and Nabil-i Azam, the historian. So the story of this photograph is quite interesting, actually, because one day in the autumn or winter of 1863, a photographer approached Mirza Musa when he was walking towards the Big Ukhli Bazaar and offered to take his photograph free of charge and bring him copies. Mirza Musa granted the photographer's request, explaining to his companions with his characteristic empathy, he wants to earn something by photographing us. This is his means of livelihood. We will not deprive him of it. It's a beautiful photograph, I think. It's just the beginnings of photography, you know, it's always so emotional to see pictures like that. Now we come to a really wonderful, great tablet, which if you want to hear in the original Arabic, you can go to the Utterance Project YouTube channel. It's the last one we published earlier this year. On the 19th of October, 1863, Baha'u'lláh reveals the Lahi Nakus, Tablet of the Bell, which was recently translated by the House of Justice in Days of Remembrance. So, on the eve of the anniversary of the Declaration of the Bab, which according to the lunar calendar fell on 19 October 1863, Baha'u'lláh revealed a beautiful tablet in Arabic in his own hand, honoring the Bab, called the Lahi Nakus, Tablet of the Bell. This tablet brought great joy to the believers who were celebrating the Bab's declaration. The tablet has 2 names. It is known as Lahi Nakus, Tablet of the Bell, because of the line in the tablet, "O monk of divine unity, ring out the bell." But it is also known as Subhanaka Yahu, O thou who art he, because of the recurring invocation to the Bab, repeated 28 times throughout the tablet, like a bell ringing. By thy name he, verily thou art he, O thou who art he. By thy name he, verily thou art he, O thou who art he. In the Tafsir-i-Hu, revealed in Baghdad, which is also the name of a tablet revealed by the Bab in the first phase of his ministry, Baha'u'lláh explains that the name he in Arabic consists of have and ha and vav, the 2 letters ha and vav, and that the name he is God's most great name, and that it is a mirror in which all of God's names and attributes are reflected together. So it's very, very, very mystical. Very mystical. A little tiny story here in Istanbul is the story that Baha'u'lláh tells to Kamal Pasha about the need for a universal language. And to illustrate this with a wink, wink, nudge, nudge is the Tower of Babel. The confusion of languages, the myth, the origin myth that's found in Genesis chapter 11, verses 1-9, that explains why the world's people speak different languages. This painting is from 1563, so it was painted exactly 300 years before this story takes place. So one day, while in Constantinople, Kemal Pasha visits Bahá'u'lláh, and their conversation turned to topics profitable to mankind. Kemal Pasha mentioned he had learned several languages, and Bahá'u'lláh gave him another radically different vision, telling him, "You have wasted your life." Boom. "It beseemeth you and the other officials of the government to convene a gathering and choose one of the diverse languages, and likewise one of the existent scripts, or else to create a new language and a new script to be taught to children in schools throughout the world. They would in this way be acquiring only two languages: one, their native tongue; two, the universal language, the language in which all other people of the world would converse. Were men to take fast hold on that which hath been mentioned, the whole earth would come to be regarded as one country, and the people would be relieved and freed from the necessity of acquiring and teaching different languages." Kemal Pasha joyfully agreed with his argument, and Baha'u'lláh told him to present the issue to the officials and ministers of the government so that it might be acted upon in the different countries. Kemal Pasha often returned to visit Baha'u'lláh after this conversation, but he never followed up on this subject again. And Baha'u'lláh testified, "Although Kemal Pasha often returned to see us again, he never again referred to this subject, although that which hath been suggested is conducive to the concord and the unity of the people of the world." Now, a story about Baha'u'llah's honor and dignity. This is a painting from 1789 that shows the king, the Sultan Selim III, holding an audience and people waiting in strict protocol to plead with him. And this is what Baha'u'lláh refused to do, is beg and plead. Most of the high-ranking personalities who called on Baha'u'lláh expected him to curry favors in securing the support of the Ottoman government to his cause. And they soon found that Baha'u'lláh was above such things, and that his unfailing honor and his integrity, his dignity of bearing, and his upright conduct ended up impressing all of them. The conversation when these notables of Istanbul were in Baha'u'llah's presence mostly centered on the arts and sciences, but one day some noblemen dispensed unsolicited advice to Baha'u'lláh and said, "To appeal, to state your case, and to demand justice is a measure demanded by custom." Now, one thing you don't want to say to the Bab, Abdul-Baha, and Baha'u'lláh and Abdul-Baha is that you do things because of custom. Like, they do not like to hear this because the Baha'i dispensation came to break a lot of these customs. So Baha'u'lláh is reported to have said to them that what is understood is that what they understood, that stating his case was in fact nothing more than begging for favors and demands, something that he would never sink to. And he turned the tables on them by calling into question the diligence and the professionalism of the Ottoman ministers. He said, "If the enlightened-minded leaders of your nation be wise and diligent, they will certainly make inquiry and acquaint themselves with the true state of the case. If not, then their attainment of the truth is impractical and impossible." Because at this point, he's been there for several months and no one's called on him from the government to actually ascertain. So why are you exiled? Why are you here? What did you do? You know? So why beg for favors from a government that's basically not doing its job? Baha'u'lláh assured the notables present that he felt no urgency, no anxiety, and was not ready and prepared for what, and was not only ready and prepared for whatever was predestined for him, but he was submissive to the will of God and entirely confident there was no dispeller of afflictions save God. Now, Baha'u'lláh had a huge influence on his companions. After his declaration in the Garden of Rizwan, a few days before leaving Baghdad, Baha'u'lláh was no longer the leaders of the Babis. He was the manifestation of God, heralded, lauded, and extolled by the Bab, the promised one of all ages. As his companions became now his followers, they were associating with one who was the repository of all of God's attributes and powers, and they found themselves spiritually tested in the purity of their character and in the sincerity of their faith. To remain close to Baha'u'lláh, his companions underwent spiritual purification. They had to attempt to rid themselves of every trace of self, and they had to show steadfastness and detachments. detachment. Baha'u'llah's awe-inspiring and majestic presence radiated at the same time with kindness and authority. He had a very radiant countenance and an all-encompassing love and compassion that had a magnetic effect on people, meaning that people were magnetically attracted to him. He could simultaneously overwhelm and revive, comfort his disciples, and transport them to spiritual realms. He was no longer the Baha'u'llah from before the declaration. He was now living the truth of being a manifestation of God. And he didn't have to hold his power back anymore. He could let it shine, and he did. Two people entering his presence would feel his love directed at only them, which was an amazing feeling. His words could be addressed to each alone. Even though he was speaking to both, each alone received his message as addressed to himself alone. And neither could describe their experience. So affected they were in their innermost soul by having been in his presence. They were only able to say to each other, I was intoxicated, or I was in a state of ecstasy. That's all they could say to each other. Now, a very great work that Baha'u'llah reveals in Constantinople, perhaps the greatest, is the Matnavi Mubarak, the Blessed Couplets, sometime in August 1863. Now, the Matnavi Mubarak is believed by some scholars of Baha'u'llah's writings to have been really revealed at 2 times because of 2 very different styles in the Matnavi Mubarak. Some believe that he began in the 1850s in Sulaymaniyeh, but most of the poem was revealed in autumn 1863 in Istanbul, where Baha'u'llah completed the revelation of this tablet, of this, I don't know if you can even call it a tablet. The Matnavi Mubarak is the longest work that Baha'u'llah has ever revealed in rhyme and meter, and also one of the last he ever revealed in rhyme and meter, so poem, basically. It is a poem that uses rhyming couplets in Persian. So intrinsically, Persian is a rhyme-rich language. And the most famous example is Rumi's 13th century masterpiece, the Manavi, the spiritual couplets, 6 books of poetry amounting to 25,000 verses, and considered to be the greatest mystical poem ever written. Now, as you remember during the Baha'u'llah's stay in Sulaymaniyeh, when he revealed the Ode of the Dove in the same rhyme and meter as Ibn Farid's masterpiece, this is the Matnavi Mubarak, which is a sort of an homage to the Matnavi Manavi. So Baha'u'llah's Matnavi Mubarak, which is a long poem at 404 verses, alludes to Rumi's poem, closing with the trope of reed pipes with which Rumi opens his poem, and using similar imagery to the Persian hidden words, such as theological and rhetorical tools of Sufism, to prepare the way for Baha'u'llah's future, wider proclamation, and to disclose his station to the Babis and humanity as a whole, including mentions of Hussein, Ali, the Mahdi, and Imami traditions of Shi'ism. In this work, Baha'u'llah discloses the realities of the world of humanity and indicates how we can achieve the summit of glory, echoing the hidden words. He identifies himself as the day star of truth, describes his coming as the advent of the day of God, the divine springtime, and bestowing new life on all creation. In the Matnavi Mubarak, Baha'u'llah cautions that before human beings can truly reflect divine virtues, they must first purify their hearts, tear asunder the veils that keep them from perceiving spiritual truths. So it's a dual movement, if you will. You know, the movement of purifying your heart is sort of like an internal movement, you know, where you're like working on your inner self. And then the movement of tearing asunder the veils is sort of like an external movement, you know, it's like your inward attitude and your outward attitude almost. And now we come to shortly before the 1st of December, 1863, Baha'u'llah refuses a 3rd banishment. So here are the enemies of Baha'u'llah who plot to exile him again, top to bottom, left to right. We have Mirza Hussein Khan, the Persian ambassador in Istanbul. Top right. sorry. Bottom left, we have Ali Pasha, the prime minister to the Sultan. Oh, sorry. Top left, Sultan Abdulaziz, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Now, top right, on the right, Mirza Hussein Khan, the Persian ambassador. Then on the bottom, Ali Pasha, the prime minister to the Sultan. And next to him is Fuad Pasha, the foreign minister to the Sultan. So these are the actors in this story here that you're going to hear. Haji Mirza Hussein Khan, the Persian ambassador in Istanbul, who had plotted against Baha'u'lláh when Baha'u'lláh was in Baghdad, was on the offensive again. Under constant pressure from the Persian government, he slandered Baha'u'lláh to the chief ministers of Sultan Abdulaziz, the guys on the bottom, Ali Pasha, Fuad Pasha, who then pressured the Sultan, top left, to banish Baha'u'lláh to Edirne, the farthest city in the Ottoman Empire, all the way in Europe, making it the first time a manifestation of God would ever set foot on the European continent. Haji Mirza Safa was a close friend of the Persian ambassador, and he was a two-faced man with ambitions to become a murshid. He wanted to have an influential position with high social status. So Haji Mirza Safa frequently visited Baha'u'lláh in Istanbul, but at times, Baha'u'lláh would speak to him with such authority that Haji Mirza Safa was at loss for words. And everyone in the house could hear Baha'u'lláh, so loud was his voice to this two-faced man who was just trying to get him exiled. Mirza Hussein Khan deeply resented Baha'u'llah's independent and dignified behavior when he refused to beg for political favors. And he instructed Haji Mirza Hassani Safa to spread unfounded rumors and to portray Baha'u'lláh as an arrogant person who thought himself above the law and posed a threat to all authority. Calumnies about Baha'u'lláh began to spread in gatherings of these notables in Istanbul, who said that Baha'is were a, quote, mischief to all the world, destructive of treaties and covenants, source of trouble, baleful to all lands, kindled the fire and consumed the earth, thought they would be outwardly fair-seeming, yet they are deserving of every chastisement and punishment. So we see a reversal of fortunes where, hold on just 1 second. Where Baha'u'lláh was so revered, and then he became very calumniated during his stay. And shortly before the 1st of December, 1863, the edict for a third exile. In the photograph here is another portrait of Fuad Pasha, the foreign minister. In the winter of 1863, Baha'u'llah's 18-month-old daughter, Sadhiye Khanum, with his second wife, passed away and was buried in a plot of land outside the Edirne gate of Constantinople. Soon after this personal tragedy, Baha'u'lláh received the edict for his third exile. Baha'u'lláh refused to receive the Grand Vizier's envoy, delegating Abdul Baha and Mirza Musa to listen to his trivial observations and arguments. The envoy said he would return in 3 days to receive Baha'u'llah's response. Baha'u'lláh refused to comply to the edict for a new banishment because it was unfair. It was unprovoked. It was a cruel humiliation to be banished to the dead of winter to Edirne at the very edge of the Ottoman Empire. For Baha'u'lláh, who since his arrival in Constantinople, he had kept himself away from the world of political cross currents, and he hadn't uttered a single word of complaint, despite being disrespected and not visited by the authorities to check on his well-being. So the very, very, very first tablet to a king that Baha'u'lláh ever revealed was actually revealed in Istanbul. And we still have, so this is the story of that tablet. This tablet has now been lost. The tablet was originally called Lahi Abdul Aziz va Vukala, so tablet to Sultan Abdulaziz. Baha'u'lláh revealed this lengthy tablet after receiving the decree for a new exile. The next morning, Baha'u'lláh placed the tablet in a sealed envelope and instructed Shamsi Beg to deliver it to Ali Pasha, the Grand Vizier, and say that it was sent down from God. Shamsi Beg did not know the contents of the tablets, but he testified. No sooner had the Grand Vizier perused the tablet than he turned the color of a corpse and remarked, It is as if the King of Kings were issuing his behest to his humblest vassal and regulating his conduct. That's how powerful and mighty the tablet was. In the tablet, Baha'u'lláh rebuked the Sultan for his unjust punishment, reprimanded his ministers, exposing their immaturity and incompetence. Baha'u'lláh addressed the ministers in several passages, sternly admonishing them not to take pride in material possessions or foolishly seeking riches. In the Lahi Abdul Aziz Vavukala was intended by Baha'u'lláh as a turning point, as he stated, quote, whatever action the ministers of the Sultan took against us after having become acquainted with its content cannot be regarded as unjustifiable. The acts they committed before its perusal, however, can have no justification. Okay. So this is the same Haji Mirzani Safa. He sends the message to the Persian ambassador. This is the Persian ambassador here, Mirza Hussein Khan, the Mushirud-Dali. Before leaving Constantinople forever, Baha'u'lláh had a last and memorable interview with Haji Mirza Hassani Safa, asking him to convey the following message to Haji Mirza Hussein Khan, the Persian ambassador. What did it profit thee and such as like thee to slay year after year so many of the oppressed? We few that we are will stand our ground until every one of us meets a martyr's death. When Mirza Hassani Safa replied it wasn't possible to withstand a government, Baha'u'lláh said, whenever I find the whole world assailing me with drawn swords, all alone and engulfed as I may be, I see myself seated on the throne of might and authority. It has always been the fate of the manifestations of God to meet such injustice and oppression. You feel in the way that these reported utterances of Baha'u'lláh are being told that he is proclaiming. You really feel that he is proclaiming his mission, and that slowly it's ramping up where it's going to be a public proclamation to all the kings of the world in several years to come here. Baha'u'lláh asked Haji Mirza Hassani Safa to remind the ambassador of a Quranic verse in which a believer argued with the Pharaoh. Thunderstruck, Haji Mirza Safa asked permission to leave, and Baha'u'lláh asked his followers, do you wish to drain the cup of martyrdom? No better time can there be than now to offer your lives in the paths of your Lord. Our innocence is manifestly evident, and they have no alternative but to declare their injustice. Baha'u'llah's faithful followers were ready to follow Baha'u'lláh into martyrdom. Ottoman observers felt pride in Baha'u'llah's integrity, refusal to back down. And Ottoman authorities were really impressed that Persia still had men of the caliber of Baha'u'lláh who could stand up for their dignity. Persian officials in Tehran said Baha'u'llah's conduct had brought prestige to his nation at a time when most Qajar princes begged for handouts. So everyone was really on the side of Baha'u'lláh. But for, of course, enter Mirza Yahya. Mirza Yahya's cowardice. Baha'u'lláh accepts the third banishment. Unsurprisingly, one of the exiles who was not ready for the path of martyrdom was Mirza Yahya, and a group of like-minded believers approached Baha'u'lláh on their behalf and begged him to accept the exile rather than martyrdom, saying, we have our wives and our children with us, and they will perish too. Baha'u'lláh assured them that to offer all that one has in the path of God is an act of highest merit, and that their families could be sent to the homes of foreign envoys where they would be safe and looked after. Baha'u'llah's words did not comfort the small and terrified cowardly band who began looking for schemes in which their lives would be spared. Baha'u'lláh saw that his refusal of the second exile had caused a division in the believers. And in the end, he consented to leave Constantinople, commenting that by doing so, the community of believers had missed an opportunity that would have brought great prestige to the faith. They called us here as their guests, and innocent as we are, they turned on us with vengeance. If we, few as we are had stood our ground to fall martyrs in the midmost heart of the world, the effect of that martyrdom would have been felt in all the worlds of God, and possibly nothing would have happened to us. Mirza Yahya's pathological cowardice and ability to disunite believers had forced the hand of Baha'u'lláh. And tomorrow we will pick up where we left off with the third exile and the journey to Constantinople, 12 days of hell, the shortest, but most perilous and lethal journey to an exile in Baha'u'llah's life. Thank you very much, friends. I want to just close today off by saying thank you to Clearwater Baha'is for making this live stream and recording and YouTube presence possible. Thank you so much for Desert Rose Baha'i Institute for supporting us in this. And thank you to Firm Foundation for organizing this in the first place. Thank you so much, everyone.